Hi there, my name is Amber Estenson, otherwise known as That Midwestern Mom, and today we're talking with Juan Osorno, a bean breeder at NDSU. Thank you for talking with us today.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's always nice to kind of tell the story about the things that we do. Yeah.
Well, I think the first question we should lead into is, what is a bean breeder?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, right? People ask me, what do you do? And I tell them, well, I'm a bean breeder. And they're like, what is that? It's like, well, do you know what a dog breeder do? Well, I do the same, but with beans, right? And so the same happens with many other crops. It's just that ability of improve crops to get better in any sort of trait, whether that's higher yield, disease resistance, better nutrition, anything that gives us an advantage for production or for any type of use that we're going to do with that crop. Plant breeders are able to work on that and deliver new varieties and new products using all sorts of different technologies and things that we have in our hands.
So, talk to me about beans and GMOs. Is it a GMO since you're changing things?
Not in the case of beans. We're still using conventional genetic tools to do all the improvement work that we do. It takes about 7 to 10 years to come up with a new variety from the time that you're doing that initial cross, just the hand pollination, all the way to releasing a variety. So in dry beans, there are some technical reasons why we don't do GMOs. I'm not against GMOs personally. I think it's a great technology. It's just that dry beans don't like to be grown in labs and petri dishes and things like that. It's just some sort of a technical, natural thing that happens with the dry beans. There are GMO dry beans actually in Brazil. There was something that was released to be resistant to a viral disease they have down there, and it worked really well for some time. But now the entity that released and developed that GMO bean decided not to produce seed of it anymore. I'm still not sure what. I'm trying to find out what happened with it, what were the reasons for it. Our consumers have told us that they are not interested into GMO beans. So, listening to that feedback, which is really important for us, we have decided not to use that tool for now in our case. So everything we do is done in the conventional way, using a lot of other tools, technical tools and modern tools, but nothing that creates. So technically, GMO stands for insertion of a foreign gene that is not part of that organism into that. We don't do any of that. Everything we do is with the genes. We're pretty much reshuffling the same genes that are already there, right?
Yep. So a very, very sophisticated bumblebee.
I really like that.
In a very controlled environment.
I really like that, yeah. That's what we do. And of course, the bumblebee is probably more promiscuous than what we do. We try to target things in a much more focused way and work. But yeah, it's a good analogy. I like it. Yeah.
This sounds like a fascinating job. How did you become a bean breeder?
It's like any other thing in life. You don't know what you don't know until you find it or experiment it, right? So when I was in my undergrad back in my home country in Colombia, we visited this bean breeding program. Actually, it happened to be a bean breeding program. And the breeder at that time took us to the research plots where he was working on, and showed us two very contrasting plots in the field. And he told us, this is a resistant variety, this is a susceptible variety. You can do all these thanks to breeding. And I'm like, where do I sign? I was really impactful, and said, this is the kind of impact that you can do with this type of job, right? So I was already a student in agriculture, in agronomy back in those days. I was still kind of doing my soul search of what kind of area I wanted to get into. And as soon as we did that visit, that was like a life-changing. I also had a really good professor back in those days for the plant breeding class. And that's the big difference that a good teacher can do on you, right? It can transform and can change your pathway completely, And that kind of opened up a whole kind of universe that I wasn't aware of it. His name was Ariel Gutierrez. He's back in Colombia. He's retired now. But I was really happy. I saw him last year in a meeting that we had, and I was even more surprised when he said that I was one of his best students in class. I was like, I don't even remember that. But anyway, life works, and yeah, I'm really happy. And I think part of the passion I kind of put into this job is because of that. I'm doing something, and I'm doing it for fun, not just because it's a job, right?
Yeah. So the work that you do as a bean breeder, why is it important, and who is it important to, and why should we be interested?
Yeah. So I think bean breeders fulfill a very important niche or need for food production worldwide. We have a growing population every day. We need to increase the amount of food that we have available for everybody, right? Bean breeders, one of the major accomplishments, it's being able to increase the yield, the amount of pounds that you get for an acre, right? In most crops, we can say that we are producing more. We produce more beans today in that same acre of land than what we used to do 50 or 100 years ago. And in a big portion of that increase is thanks to the work that breeders, not just me, but all the breeders, right, have done across the years and the different crops. So I think socially it's a very fulfilling thing to know or to feel that you're contributing to food security for everybody in a way, right?
So you're producing higher yields, you're producing more food. So why is it important to have different varieties or different types of beans?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In the case of beans, we have this diversity of types, or we call them market classes, right? You have the pintos, the navies, the blacks, the kidneys, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just in the U.S. If you go outside the U.S., you actually get to see even more colors, more types. I mean, there's probably virtually hundreds of different market classes. There is a very strong cultural attachment between the place that you grow up and the beans, the type of beans that you eat, right? So as breeders, you have to keep that human factor into consideration and understand that if someone grew up eating pinto beans all their life, that's probably what they're gonna expect to be eating for the rest of their lives. So trying to change those consumption patterns is really hard. So that's the reason why we try to make sure that when we are trying to improve yields or nutrition or anything on a pinto variety, it still has to look like a pinto, right? Otherwise, it's not going to be successful. Beautiful story, I have that as a side story. During the Civil War in Nicaragua back in the 80s, in Nicaragua they consume red beans, small red beans. The U.S. sent a shipment of pinto beans as food aid. People didn't eat them because they didn't think those were beans, right? So it's again, it shows that strong cultural attachment that we have with our food and our culture. And so you have to be conscious about those things, and that's the reason why we need multiple breeders across multiple regions, multiple crops, because they all have to fill different niche for different things, right?
Yep.
One common question I get, or kind of a confusion issue that I get to hear a lot, is what is the difference between a variety versus a market class, right? And that's a very common thing that I get to hear. And it depends what you're talking to. From a consumer perspective, I think we can call these different types as varieties. When it comes down to the industry, when we're working with the bean industry and people that work on beans, we tend to call these as market classes, right? Okay. Each one of these beans have a unique color, shape, size, and even flavor sometimes, right? That makes them very different. So we treat them almost like different animals, different. So again, going back to my example of dogs, different dog breeds, right? Same thing, you just have different breeds of beans here with different uses and different interests. In the case of what I do, we call a variety a specific set of genes that we put into a bean plant in order to make it unique, right, and stable, and that's what farmers get to grow. Now, when you go to the supermarket and buy a bag of beans or a can of beans, it might be probably a mixture of multiple varieties of what breeders developed or what farmers grew, right? So the concept of variety really for the final consumer it doesn't mean the same as when we're talking about, at the farming or at the growing level. So that's why I've seen a lot of confusion there. A lot of people are asking me sometimes, what are the varieties that you develop? And they are asking me market types or market classes. So it's been quite interesting to see that depending on who you ask or what kind of situation you're in, a variety or a market class might mean different things, right? Yeah. So in plant breeding, it's very common for us to talk about varieties or cultivars, which is just a unique breed of beans that have unique characteristics or qualities and I'm in many cases I'm able to differentiate it. So I could take one bean variety and be able to differentiate it from another bean variety, even though they are both pintos, right? I can blend them and I don't know which one is which, but at least when they are in the plant, I should be able to tell some differences among them. Same as, for example, you and your siblings come from the same parents, but they're not exactly the same, right? You all have different features, right? Yeah.
So why is it important for farmers to have different varieties of beans?
I think it's important because it's very risky to put all your eggs in one basket, right?
Yep.
So having different genetic makeups across even your own farm, having different varieties of pinto beans in your same farm, kind of buffer out the risk of, if there is a disease that comes, hopefully it will affect just one of those varieties, but not all of them. So you almost even out, by doing that. So diversity, it's a very good thing to have in a farming operation by having different options. Because if you only put one variety there and something happens, you're at greater risk of losing everything, right?
Yeah.
So the farmers are very conscious about that, and to make sure that it's not just variety of different breeds or strains of beans, but also different crops, variety of crops, right? Having a rotation with corn, with soybeans, with sugar beets, all these things that. So in other words, a bean farmer is not just a bean farmer. It grows many other things, right?
Yep. I know that growing coffee in different types of soil can affect the taste of the coffee beans. Is that the same with edible beans?
Not to that point. I mean, I was even baffled the other day. I was watching a documentary about wine tasters and how they can, by tasting the wine, they can even tell the region where that wine was grown. I don't think we're at that level with beans. But the environment plays some role. I don't think in flavor much, but probably on some other attributes like cooking quality, nutritional quality. We have seen, for example, that the water content during harvest, the seed moisture, we call it seed moisture at harvest, is a big factor for canning quality, right? So when you can those beans, if they were too dry, they usually are going to be turning out not good. Versus if they were harvested at the right moisture level, usually the final canned product is going to be much better. So again, I don't think we're at that level of coffee or wine, but for sure there is some environmental effects in the final saying.
So then regions, environmental factors, is that going to depend on what kind of beans are best to plant in that area of the world? Because I know what we tend to plant here in Minnesota and North Dakota might be different from Puerto Rico or Costa Rica. Is that part of your job as well, is to kind of develop what beans grow best in certain regions?
Yes and no. We try to still keep whatever is their local preference. We try to work with that and try to improve within that same class. We try to always improve within whatever market class that region, that specific region has. I don't think there is necessarily. So in some cases there might be some beans that are better adapted to, for example, dry conditions or hot conditions. But in most cases, people just eat whatever color they like. Regardless of productivity or fertility. So it's pretty interesting. You go to Africa. I've been in several African countries doing bean work, and in Africa they prefer larger seed types, like the kidneys, for example. And they are not very productive. And I always tell them, I think a black bean or a pinto bean or a red or a pink bean would be more productive under these conditions. But again, good luck trying to convince them that that's a better option in terms of productivity, because they want the bean that they're used to eat, right? Anybody. So it's just human nature, I think.